In this session, we'll look at how to add photorealistic materials to a FormIt model. When finished, we will import the model into InfraWorks. Let me mention that this session represents part 3 of a 3-part series. Once again, we are picking up where we left off in the last session. Before we get started, I'm going to jump over to Google Earth Street View so we can review the materials and colors needed for our FormIt model. It looks like I'll need a light brick for the overall building. I'll need a darker stone material for these columns, maybe a red metal or red paint for the roof areas, and some glass for the windows. Knowing that, let's flip back over to FormIt. Now, to keep the length of this video as short as possible, I'm not going to be able to create and apply every material used on this building. Instead, I'll walk you through the workflow for a couple of the materials, with the understanding that the concepts that we learn would be used to apply the remaining materials to the building. To add materials, I'm going to come over to the right side of the interface and click the Materials button. This brings up the Materials palette. On this palette, I can see all of the materials in the current sketch. Right now, I don't have any. To add materials, I'll come up and click the Import Material from Library button. When this comes up, I want to apologize. It's a little bit larger than what we can fit on screen. That's all right. We can make do. Over here on the left, we can see the various categories that these materials are organized into. If you select a category, then you can then use this slider to drag up and down and select the material of your choice. I'm going to choose a brick material, so I'm going to jump over to the masonry category. I will then drag this slider down to the bottom, and then when it resets, I'm going to drag it down even further. Let's select this material called Running Light Gray. When I do, we can see a preview of that material over here to the right. To add this to my sketch, I'm going to come down just off screen and click the Import button. This adds the material to my FormIt environment. To start painting with this material, I will right-click on it and choose Paint with Material. Note the icon showing us that this material is active. I can then come over and select the faces that require that material. Now in this case, since the majority of the model is brick, I am going to double-click and that will apply the material to every face. Let me press Escape to exit the Material tool, and then I will hold down the right mouse button and orbit. As I do, you can see that this brick material has a bit of a glossy property to it. We can also see that it's a little bit too dark. Let's edit the material. In the Materials palette, I will right-click on that brick material and I'll choose Edit Material. Here in the editor, I'm going to turn off the gloss and the reflectivity properties. Note that there are additional settings here that we could toggle on and off. I can also adjust the intensity of these settings using these sliders to the right. For right now, I just want to change the color. I'll click the color property. And in the Choose Color dialog box, I'll drag the brightness setting all the way up to the top. I'll click OK, and then I'll come down and click OK. Notice how the material on the model updates instantly. Let's add another material. I'm going to grab something red for the roof. I'll do that by opening up the library. And then in the library, I will select the metal category. Once again, we'll drag the slider down, looking for something red. Let's drag down a little bit further. I'll choose this one, anodized red. And when I select that, we can see that this material seems to have a very high gloss property. Probably more than what I need. That's okay. Let me click Import. I'm going to address that right away. Let's right-click and I'll choose Edit Material. In the editor, I'm going to turn off the gloss and the reflectivity. Let's make it a little bit lighter. I'll click the color property. And then I can click and drag the color target to select a new color. I'm going to drag this down. As I do, we can see the change here in the preview. I can then drag the brightness slider up. That's pretty good. Let's click OK and OK. I will then right-click on this material and choose Paint. I would then select the faces requiring this material. Let me hold the right mouse button down. I'll orbit this up and I'll pan this over. One way we can shortcut this process, if I hover over a face, I can tap the Tab key and it will select all similar faces. I can then click to apply that material to all of those faces at one time. Let me spin this down and I'll select a couple more faces as long as we're here. I will then zoom out and we'll center the model on screen. Finally, we'll add a glass material. I'm going to jump back over to the library. In the library, I will select the glazing category and I'll choose this material called Light Blue Reflective. And then I'll click Import. Let's right-click on the material and choose Paint. I will then zoom in. I'll hover over one of these windows and tap the Tab key and click to get all of them. I'll click the door as well. And as I orbit this up, notice that since we're using glass, we can now see into the building. In this case, since there's nothing in the building, I'd rather not see through the windows, so I'm going to hit Escape to cancel out of the Material tool, and we'll edit the glass material. I'll right-click and choose Edit. I'm going to eliminate the gloss and the reflectivity, and then I'll come up to the Transparency slider and drag it all the way to the left, making the material opaque. Let's change the color of the glass as well. I'll drag the Brightness slider down to make it a touch darker. I will then click OK, and OK, and we can see the difference. Let's zoom out one more time, and we'll center the building on screen. At this point, we could use the same workflows to select and apply the remaining materials to this building. When finished, the building would look something like this. Let's orbit this around and take a look. I'll spin it back. Once all of the materials have been applied, we are ready to export this building for use in InfraWorks. I'll do that by opening the File menu. I'll come down and choose Export. I'm going to export this locally. I'm going to export all of the objects. Note there are some other options here as well. I'm going to export this as an FBX, and I'll keep the defaults, and I'll choose Export. I'm going to export this into my FBX files folder, and I'll call it Car Wash Building, and I'll click Save. Once the file's been exported, we will jump back over to InfraWorks. To add that building to the InfraWorks environment, I'll bring up Windows Explorer. From here, I'll select the FBX files folder, and then I will drag and drop the FBX file into InfraWorks. I can then tell InfraWorks what this file represents. I'm going to choose Building. If I go to the 3D Model tab, we can see that building right here. Let's go to Geolocation. I'm going to choose Interactive Placing. And as I move this, you can see that that building is quite small at my cursor. If you remember, we drew this building 140 feet long in FormIt. Well, InfraWorks by nature is a metric application. For that reason, the building is 140 centimeters over here. Not a problem, all we have to do is rescale. I'm going to tap the Escape key, and then in the Scale field, I'm going to change this to 30.48, because there are 30.48 centimeters in a foot. Once I change all of these, I will choose Interactive Placing again. My building is now the appropriate size. I'll double-click to place it. I will then come down and choose Close and Refresh. Once the building has been added, I can close the Data Sources palette, and then we can orbit around and review the environment. So if you'd like to add more life to your InfraWorks environment, consider using FormIt to model the existing buildings. As you can see, it only takes a couple minutes and a few estimated dimensions to add more realism to your project visualizations. Would you like to explore other Autodesk infrastructure ideas and workflows? If so, please visit the Civil Immersion blog by scanning the QR code or by following the URL listed below.